Welcome to a new episode of the Creative Industry Insight podcast. I'm your host, Bobby. We are ringing in the new year with a new episode. Today, we welcome director Saul Metzstein, who joins us to talk about his work on the recently concluded Series 3 of Slow Horses. Saul will talk us through his experiences of working on the show and the creative decisions that he had to make. Please be warned, there are heavy spoilers in this episode. Now let's jump into the conversation with Saul. Hi, Saul. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Hello.
We're here to talk about the third series of Slow Horses, which, as this episode comes out, has just had its finale. I've got to say, I think Slow Horses is probably the best show that Apple are being produced at the moment on their service. But I think they're probably one of the few streamers at the moment who are constantly knocking out the park with the shows and films that they're coming out with currently.
Good. I was a big fan of Severance after 300 people told me to watch it, and I finally watched it, and it was worth watching.
I've got to ask, who tipped you over the edge to make you watch it? Or was it a case of just like, well, everybody just leave me alone if I watch it?
I watch very little television, and you have to have so many people telling me I have to watch it before it ever actually happens. So I've probably watched less television than anyone listening to this podcast. But eventually, there's certain, I did Succession, I did White Lotus both seasons. I watched Severance, waiting for the next season, and that's probably about it.
Wow. Okay, I have so many questions about that, but
okay.
I don't want to spend too much time. But as a TV director, I guess for people who do want to become directors or producers or editors, you watch a lot of things just to get an eye and understand cinematic language and theory, and so on and so forth. But I guess it must be so different for yourself, because then you don't have those sort of shows in the back of your mind or certain shots that people have made.
I don't have them in the back of my mind, but I would just clarify my position. I watch a hell of a lot of films, and I have watched a lot of films. So it's just, I think partially television where I struggle is that you're committing to like 10 hours, 20 hours, whatever, that sort of thing. So I've probably watched as many films as anyone listening to this podcast, just a lot less television. So there's definitely a bank of film shots and ideas about how you shoot stuff and that sort of thing in my head all the time. And certainly when I'm making stuff, I either reference a lot of stuff with the people I'm working with, or just generally we know the kind of things we're talking about from things we've seen in common and things like that. So it's not like I'm totally blank, empty, just making it up as I go along. Although there's a bit of that.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that, because I was just thinking, completely missed the film aspect part of it, but the TV, I guess, because it's just so prevalent now about people saying you need to watch this, you need to watch that, you need to do this, and you just think, I've already got this I need to watch, I've already missed this,
I've already got it. There's already a million books I haven't read that I got to get through before I can actually watch season 6 or whatever program you tell me is very good.
Yeah, exactly. Or the worst is when either somebody says something to watch a TV show, you're like, okay, I might watch it, then you find out it's cancelled, and then it's like,
I actually, there's a funny game involving that. It's that me and a couple of producers and cameramen and things like I've talked to friends of mine, and we give each other points for TV series that we have been involved in killing off. So when we do the last episode, you get the points, and it's a sort of there's some inverse, weird, complicated. I can't quite explain it. Pride to the whole thing, but. You literally say, well, I did the last episode of this, and then it got cancelled. Aren't I good? And I had a very terrible misfortune in that, which is I did the very, very, very last episodes of Ripper Street, and then they brought it back for 2 seasons, and it was actually very annoying because I lost all my points. But the final episode I did of Ripper Street had a voiceover by the main character said he'd left. And it was all over, and this was the end. And then they brought it back. So if I were them, I would just hide my episode, because it looks like they something changed as opposed to what they knew what they were doing all along, and I lost the points.
Okay. Oh man. But I guess that's kind of like a interesting game to play as well, because you would have, because I work in film and TV as well.
Yeah.
And when you go to a project, you don't go on to it. You want to go it and make the best thing possible. So I guess all of these decisions of what's being renewed and what's being cancelled are completely out of your hands. And I always wonder what it must be like being a fly on the wall on how someone is making that decision to cancel something. And then whoever's decision to be like, actually, let's bring it back.
Yeah, I know. I must say, I've never been in that conversation. I've never seen how that actually happens. And I've certainly worked on things that got renewed that I didn't think deserved to get renewed, and the other way around, things that I thought worked beautifully that never came back. So it's not something, and particularly in the streaming world, because the data isn't really out there and there's no tickets per se and all this sort of thing, it's very difficult to know really what's happening in terms of, is this a success or is this not a success? And that's a sort of complicated relationship that it's almost a troubling relationship. You sort of don't have that feedback meaningfully. But I think when you make things deep down, you know if they worked or if they didn't work. You know, you might not share your opinion about it with others, but I think you have your own criteria of whether it worked and whether you're happy with the end product and things like that.
Especially, in the creative realm of it, because there'll be always moments where you probably look back and think like, oh, maybe we just could have done this differently, or if we changed this, or if we changed this scene here or added a scene. I can imagine that if you're watching your work back, it must drive you crazy sometimes as well.
It can do, yeah. So the only fun bit is by the time you watch it and you've forgotten how you made it, and then that's actually quite pleasurable. When you're still looking at how you made it, it's not in itself pleasurable. I have to say, I have really enjoyed watching the episodes of Slow Horses we made. I really genuinely have enjoyed them. I mean, they were a lot of fun to make, but I actually genuinely enjoyed watching them as well. And it's not something I can always say about the stuff I've done. And there's all sorts of reasons for it, and one of which is that you have this amazing cast and crew. So even if you're not necessarily doing your best, they're so good at it that there's so many things that are pleasurable. But as I said, it's not always the case. And I would say in something like Slow Horses, mostly it's done the way, almost all of it is done the way I wanted it to be done. I did once make something where I had a dream 2 years after it come out about an edit, which would have made a lot of difference. And I woke up and I realized how it should have been done 2 years after it was broadcast. So it's probably 3 years late. But Slow Horses is quite a long process because you do the whole series. So actually you have quite a lot of thinking time over the whole thing. So it's not like it's something you rush to finish or anything like that. So, but the things you might have changed your mind about, you probably got a chance to do it.
With something like Slow Horses, because you're directing the whole series, and because usually with TV, a series can have multiple directors, and each person has their own sort of feel to it, and they have their own style. But when you get something like this, where you're effectively making a long film, but it's just cut up into more smaller chunks coming out each week. Like, how do you go about prepping it and deciding certain things? Because there's a lot going on, because you're doing, I think the episodes range between 45 minutes and about an hour. So there's a lot going on in each episode, but then also you want to make sure that episodes flow and everybody's getting the right take with what you're creating as well.
I would say there's a couple of things about that. Firstly, when you start on Slow Horses, everyone is very keen to tell you do your version of Slow Horses. So they're very open to the idea that the director, inverted commas, authors it to some extent. So it's not like they tell you there's a house style. On the other hand, you discover certain things work well that you might have seen in previous seasons because of how that actor is, how that set is, or whatever. So there's that. it is made like, in production, it's made like a long film. And I would just like to make the point that it's not that long a film by the standards of films nowadays, because there's a lot of long, there's a lot of 3 hour plus films. So it's not unbelievably long. It's just quite long. And the more complicated thing is actually in post-production, when you then deliver episodes one by one, or actually, I think we did deliver them 2 by 2 to Apple. And that's more complicated because you're somewhat doing a film and somewhat doing television. But actually in the production, you're just making a big film. And as I said, it's not massively longer than some of these over-length films that happen nowadays. You shoot for roughly 100 days. So it's which is by far the longest I've ever shot on anything. But there are advantages of various kinds to the director doing the whole thing. One of the things is you can block shoot locations. So if it was a typical TV series where maybe you had 3 directors doing 6 episodes, you might have scenes in Slough House that you keep coming back to, whereas we could bunch them up together and things like that. And then also you have a longer relationship with the crew and the actors. So in a way you can talk about things for longer in a way that you do in a film, in a way you don't on television. So I would say, other than the stamina thing of keeping going for months, it's not, I would say it's on balance a little bit easier.
So I wasn't expecting you to say that it was shot in 100 days, but I think some of that also makes sense because of the action sequences and certain big set pieces in the show itself. So yeah, that kind of taken me aback, because I think when I worked on a 10-part, I wouldn't say drama, but it's like a comedy drama, but there were hour-long episodes. I think we spent 6 or 7 days per episode. Yeah.
No, I mean, look, I once had dinner with Roger Corman, the famous B-movie producer, and Roger Corman had a very interesting thing, which is he said that it wasn't the budget, it was the number of days you had, and that's actually the real thing. And so Slow Horses is sort of 15 or 16 days an episode, which by British television standards is very generous. It's quite a big budget show, and actually that's pretty generous by American television standards. That's even more generous because they tend to shoot fast, long days. One thing that we did on Slow Horses is we shot 9-hour days, which is short, but I think the logic is that the crew continue to have a life. They can go home and actually their family remember what they look like and things like that. And the crew don't just shoot one, they shoot 2. They shoot two seasons back to back. So the same crew shoot season 3 and season 4. So they have a 200-day shoot, which is a hell of a big shoot. I would say, however, compared to action films, actually it's still a lot faster. It's still a lot more it's still a lot closer to television than it is to something which really has like a James Bond film or something. So it's in some ways it's a little bit between television and film. I mean, I don't think equipment-wise and crew-wise, anything like that, we have anything less than a big film. But time-wise, we are nearer television. That's the difference. I mean, each episode roughly costs because I can't give you the exact numbers, but it roughly costs what a medium-sized film costs. Remember, or a very big British film. That's each episode. So it is these things. It's not flying helicopters across the Bosphorus River and car chases and everything. It's not a terribly cheap thing to do, but it's fun.
Well, I can imagine as a director, like when you're reading the scripts and seeing that, oh, look, we're going to be doing a car chase here, or even the flying a helicopter over a certain area, because those are, I know there's big character moments in the show, but then also those are the, as I like to say, money shots in the show, to be like, even though we have these comedic elements or these serious elements, there's also these action scenes that we need to take into consideration. And it's also fascinating to hear about the sort of difference in style of shooting on a show like this, because shooting a film is very taxing on people, on crews, and how we work, because even though you've got a shoot day of 10 hours, there's also could be prep and wrap, and then also those last minute changes that something happens, that somebody's ill, so you might need to change your day completely.
I'm terrified by these poor guys who have to shoot soap operas and they shoot 20 pages a day. I mean, that's hard. Shooting a big action sequence for something like Slow Horses with a massive crew and all the equipment and everything is much easier, actually. I mean, it's paradoxically, it's the increase in scale doesn't mean it's harder. You have a lot more support and things like that. So, I mean, I know a lot of people who came up through very cheap television, sort of daytime soaps and things like that. And my God, these guys suffer, in a way that you don't suffer when you're making the size of program that we had. I mean, it was also, I have to just say in particular, we had a very good producer, this woman called Jane Robertson, and she just kept control of the thing very beautifully. So it really, I've done much more painful jobs, things that are much harder to do. This is not one of them. This was, I would say, mostly a pleasure, and you're mostly, oh God, I'm actually enjoying this. This is fun.
I think the worst. I'd say the worst, but I actually quite enjoy it. I think the most I've shot in a day when I was working on a comedy show, I think we did 13 pages in a day.
Yeah.
Which at the time it was just like, you kind of look at it and you think, strap in. It's going to be one of those days, and we can't go over either. So it's like, okay, cool.
I think I've done 9. I think nine pages on a day was the worst I've ever done, and it was pretty painful. It wasn't much fun. Yeah, the least I've done is about 15 seconds. So it's just slightly slower. But I mean, we do have like long dialogue scenes in Slow Horses and scenes with lots of actors and things like that. I mean, it's not like we're not doing a lot, but we sort of do the right amount, I would say, and which certainly makes it easier to do your job well.
I think as well, like when you have those dialogue scenes, because I think it's very easy as an audience member not to realize how difficult they could be for actors to perform and also to capture it, because we're used to seeing the final piece of the back and forth. And I think you see this in your series of Slow Horses, where you have Taverner and Ingrid going back and forth at one point. And I get it that in the post that you can sort of pace it, but then being there on the day, that could take, I'm not sure, half a day of them going back and forth. And then they could improvise their certain lines as well, because they're very frosty towards one another and the situation.
But I mean, look, the most fun thing you can do in television is when you're occasionally lucky enough to have actors like Kristen Scott Thomas and Sophie Okonedo and obviously Gary Oldman and Jack Lowden and all, and Saskia Reeves, and you just get to watch them do their thing. I mean, that's pleasure. You get a little bit of the thrill of going to the theater, and you're just sitting there watching these people and they just add so much to what are already fun lines. But I mean, in a way, if someone were to ask me what's the most fun thing in television, actually, it isn't shooting these big action sequences, because they're quite technical and they're very slow, and they sort of, a lot of it's made in the edit and that sort of thing. But you're just to be able to watch these people do their thing and do that magical thing of making it all come alive is just, to me, that's just pure privilege. We had one particular scene I really loved shooting on Slow Horses, which is in episode 3, when Spider Webb, played by Freddie, on his surname, Freddie Fox, does this whole performance in front of River. And what's so fun about it? Firstly, he's such a good actor, and secondly, where the scene is him being rude to River in front of all these other guys he's working with, who are all actors as well. And it's like watching a stage performance, because all the actors are getting into it and they're all cheering him and everything, because that's what the scene requires. But you literally get having this thing of sitting there watching just like a really funny comedy performance, and the crew are all laughing, and we're all just, it's just, that to me is the real thrill of it. And then you can even make it better once you get in the edit, and you can actually chop up all the best bits. But that scene is so entertaining, you could just show the rushes, I mean, it's just, and that's just a marvelous thing that these guys can do these amazing things. They can do it again and again and again, and arrive in the right place, and you can edit it all together. I mean, but to do that and get paid to do it, wow, it's great.
Do you have any of those moments as well if you're sitting by the monitor and you're watching some of these scenes play out and you think, fucking hell, this is like, this is what we're doing, like you kind of marvel at what people are doing, that sometimes you might forget that you're directing this and that.
Yeah, but there's a very funny sort of simple thing about directing, particularly now that you have, like when I started, either you had no monitor or you had this terrible little playback system. But now you're watching a monitor, which is more or less exactly as it goes out, and you do something called a LUT. I don't know if you know what that is. A LUT is the color look that you make for the camera. So you already have tweaked it a little bit, and you're watching it, and you're more or less just watching television. Like you're sitting there. There's no edits in it, of course, but you're just sitting there watching television. And in a way, it's a very easy thing to do, because you're looking at it, go, oh, is this good television? Is this not good television? You just have that thing, and it just in some ways it just so happens that it's live in front of you, but it doesn't. Because it's very similar to the end product. It actually is very liberating. It allows you just to see, would I watch this? Does this look like something entertaining? Do I believe what he or she is saying? You know, that sort of thing. So these things are all, they're all enjoyable. Then you get to watch a guy like Gary Oldman, who really, really is good at his job, you know, and you're just going to go, oh God, I could see, you know, these things I'm just learning watching this guy do his thing. Again, I even get paid for it, but I literally just watching a guy who's one of the best guys in the world at doing what he does. And then it's just like, this is fun, you know.
I guess as well, like when you're working with certain talent as well, and working with all these actors who basically have lived in these characters for a number of years, so they kind of know what the inside out is of them as well. And it must feel a bit strange as an actor having a different director on for each series, because you might be told different things by different directors, because everybody has a different style or how they want what's on the page to be portrayed on the screen. But I guess there's always that continuum of like, will we always be there, and we always have certain mannerisms. So Gary Oldman as an actor has a very how do we say it, rude demeanor about trying to encourage his co-workers.
Yes.
And well, it feels like it kind of like hams up every season a bit more. So this is the sort of series where he's even more funnier, even more cruder. And it feels like he's kind of been like, you have more free reign to say certain one-liners and do certain actions.
There's a lovely tension, which is who owns the character. And in some way, they already own their characters. And so there's a little bit of creative friction between what you want them to do and what they know they would do. And also their characters are them. You know, I mean, like they own it physically in that sense. Whatever tension that is much better than the tension of an actor not owning their character. Because actually the worst thing you can have with an actor, I met a particularly terrible actor I worked with once, who I will not name, but quite reasonably successful actor who's not a very good actor. And I remember we had a scene where he walks in with some other guys and he said, I just don't really know where to stand. Where should I stand? And you're like, don't you have a feeling of where your character would like to stand? Don't you have something you want to do with your character to invent a story to yourself to make him stand somewhere? That's much more painful when you actually have to lead a guy through all of these things to just land in something very simple that should be that actually they should be invested in. So the fact that my guys effectively have had, in Slow Horses, have had 2 seasons to rehearse before they come and work with me ultimately is great, because they own it and they have opinions and they have feelings about what their characters do and don't do. And what they're all very good at is keeping true to what their character is. And I think that, and ultimately that's helpful. The other thing is Will Smith, the writer, is on the set most of the time as well. And he's had a long relationship. This, you know, when I did season 3 of that, they'd already made 12 episodes together. So they talk to him a lot about overall character arc things. But I think it's a wonderful thing when an actor owns their character. I mean, Gary Oldman knows what Jackson Lamb does, how he moves, what he wears, everything. And it's not inflexible. I mean, you have a dialogue with him, you have dialogue with all the actors about it, but they care about their own character in a way that I have to care about everyone's character. So I have a split loyalty where they only have a loyalty to their own character, which means they're very insightful about what their character doesn't do in a way that I don't have the time just to be invested in one character. So if you look at the American system and how you do television, directors just come on for like a few days prep, shoot the thing, and get lost, kind of thing. And in that, I don't even think you've got the time to really engage with the actors to some extent. To some extent, you're just there to make the process happen. At least in a thing like Slow Horses, you have a 100-day relationship, and any rehearsals you do at the beginning and any ADR you might do afterwards. So you do have a relationship where you can work out how these people act, how these people own their character, how much help they need, how much help they don't need, all this sort of thing. How much to stay out of their way. So it's a privilege to get to see these people who are very good at these things. And of course, I just think that is an exceptional cast as well. And I have to say it's cast by Nina Gold, who's possibly the greatest casting director in the country, without wanting to offend any other great casting directors in the country. And the other thing we do in terms of the casting, which I think is worth mentioning, is there's no part too small that we don't really care who we put in it. And I think that's a very, ultimately the program, the acting in the program is judged by your worst bit of acting. And we just have to always keep it, assume everything has to matter. Every scene has to matter. Every incidental character has to matter. I mean, we really pain over this stuff. I say pain in a good way. We try very hard, and Nina finds us these amazing people who just come in for small beats or guest stars and things like that. Again, it's wonderful fun to work with them.
There's a lot to sort of pick out from that, because I'll start with the actor part of it. So it's interesting, as I guess, even if this was when you're working with an actor and they don't know where their character is going to stand, I think regardless of who it is, I don't think they've prepped themselves well enough, or they're confident enough in their performance to know what to do. And if he's like leading a horse to water sort of thing situation. But again, if you're with then actors who have been with these characters with previous 12 episodes and know them inside out, there'll be a different sort of demeanor. But then also that means that they've spent roughly 200 days on set as these people and in this world. So then you will know what should be in your character's pockets if need be, or sure, even chewing gum they like to eat, or I guess little things like that.
But also one thing I do, and I believe quite strongly in this, is if it's a scene where they're moving around a room or something, I try not to have too heavy a preconception as to how it's going to be. So the choreography and things like that are discovered in the moment. And again, not only it keeps it a bit alive, keeps it a bit exciting as a thing to do, but it also engages them and gives them an opportunity to add something or to make a choice. And I think that's very important, because and you're not doing it to them as a favor. I mean, it's nice to get them involved, but the thing is, you can't force characters into doing things without making the whole thing seem a bit forced, and again, the more they bring to it, and some actors know what they have in their pocket, some don't work like that. I mean, you have to have a time to see which ones need that discussion, which ones need backstory, which ones don't, which ones need help moving around a room, which ones don't, or to answer the simpler question, how do you direct actors? It's how you direct each individual actor. There isn't a one size fits all, but it's half of the enjoyment is seeing how the different ways they have of working, and the different ways that you have of working with them, or manipulating them, or letting them lead you, or all these things.
As you said, yeah, every actor does work differently, but I guess it's like trusting one another in the process of what's going on, and letting someone explore, as when you're saying as well, that you go in and find the scene of movement on the day, rather than, oh, this is what we're going to do, because then I guess that kind of gives you a bit of that shackles you a little bit in terms of what you want to do, and not be open to collaboration as much, because you have a certain way of like how you would like to get it done, rather than actually let's free flow a little bit, let's freestyle. But then there's also an interesting point you make as well. We're talking about the showrunner Will Smith, who is very, as a showrunner executive, you have a lot of say creatively, and when it comes to writing the show and adapting the book. When it comes to something like that, because Apple and the studio have told you, oh, when you come in, make it your own. However, with it already having pre-existing material and having pre-existing series as well, like what are the conversations like with Will, and how do you go about then molding how you want the show to be?
Well, one of the things is the advantage of a series thing that's had previous seasons is you can look at previous seasons and you decide, I think that works and I think that doesn't work. So you already got an advantage in a way, which is you just learn from what everyone did before, and that advantage totally outweighs the disadvantage of there's a set style. I have to say, it's dead easy. You think, well, I really like that scene, I'd like to, or I really didn't think that worked. So that's very easy. In terms of working with Will is one of these strange people who's just like the nicest person you ever met, and we have a very like an entirely egoless conversation about how we do things. I mean, he really is. He's an unbelievably nice man, way nicer than I am, and we just discuss how we're going to do it. I make suggestions. He takes them on board if he thinks they're good suggestions. He explains why he's not going to do it if he doesn't think they're good suggestions. We're quite different, so it's actually quite a good, we have complementary skills, I think. But he's just incredibly relaxed about it. And he came out of that In the Thick of It and Veep and that sort of Armando Iannucci stable. And one of the things Armando taught him was to not get stuck. And if somebody tells you it doesn't work, just try writing something else. So he's got a marvelous ability to just, you come up with something and he just works at it. And he never has that resistance of saying, no, this is how I wrote it, this is how it'll be. He accepts that you might have a problem, and then he tries to just do something else that doesn't in itself ruin the original idea that he had. But he's really amazing. I mean, I've literally been in queues waiting to check in at airports, and we've talked about something, and he whips his laptop out and holds it in one arm, and he's typing with the other, and he rewrites a scene because he doesn't have any problem doing that. When I write, I have to be in exactly the right mood. I have to have slept exactly the right amount. I have to have a comfortable seat. I have to, it has to be, I don't know, what my biorhythms have to be in the right place, and Will Smith has none of that. He can just do it. But I think it's that training that he had. Just attack the script, make it work. Don't be resistant. Don't worry about it. Don't just go for it. And I have to say, it's really been one of the most pleasurable experiences I've had, because a lot of television, the writer's either inaccessible, the producer doesn't want you to speak to the writer, and then they deal with the material as if it's a combination of what God put on the tablet that Moses brought down from the mountain and Shakespeare, as if nothing could be changed. And I think it all changes. It just, ideally, you do a lot of the changes in prep before you waste time doing it, and then you work with the actors and you work with the editors and you work with them. It's an evolving process. But I think to get the director and writer working well together is gold dust. I mean, I think that's just, it just makes the whole process much easier. And it's weirdly uncommon in television. I mean, I would say if the program Slow Horses, assuming you think it's good, if it has a secret thing that works, it's that it's got the most amazing lead actor, it's got an amazing cast, and it's got this writer who's responsive to ideas and doesn't and the actors can feed into that, and I can feed into that, and the executive producers can feed into that, and he talks to Mick Herron, the writer of the books, and they can all communicate. And I think that's an amazing and unusual thing.
There's quite an interesting way of working, and I'm kind of the same as well when it comes to writing, because as you said, I need all of this to be right. Basically, the way that we do it is we'll do everything but right during the day, and just make an excuse that the seat's not comfy, or there's a new YouTube video about the top 10 craziest things that happened in 2023 that are unsolved, and it's like, oh, maybe this will give me inspiration. But in reality it will just creep me out and make me want to like lock myself away from the world. But I guess like when you are a showrunner and you're effectively, this is your baby, and well, half your baby, because there's also Mick Herron's books that you're adapting, so it's kind of that side as well. But I guess if you are going to be collaborating with so many people and making it, want to make something successful, because ultimately you want to be a showrunner where your show kind of goes on for how many series and continues to be popular, and people want to keep coming back for more of it. So I guess that's another thing where people are like, you need to be open to collaborations and use your experience to attack the script. And as you said, if you think there's certain things that just not working when you're reading it, and then it's like, well, if we change it to this, and you think like, perfect, wow, like cool.
Yeah, but I mean, in my experience of making television, if something doesn't work on the script, you never really get it working right. You know what I mean? It's like it's you can help it a little bit, but it's all in the script. It's not very easy to repair stuff that never worked. The worst possible situation you are in as a television director was when you get on set and the actor says, I don't understand this doesn't make sense. And you say, I've been trying to explain that to the writer for months and he won't change it. And that does happen. And that's an impossible position to be in. And doesn't happen in Slow Horses because you will have had that chance to have that, either a logic discussion or a discussion about how the emotional arc of a scene goes or something like that. You will have had a chance to talk to Will about that. On some, I mean, it's not uncommon where an actor, because actors also care, as I said before, they care most about their own part. So they are so much more invested in it than anyone in the world, that they notice things which are so precise that you might have missed. And so that sometimes they spot something. And if you can't find out a way of solving it, it can be very tricky. But ideally, you get into a situation where you don't have any of these things that the actor suddenly goes, oh, wait a minute, that makes no sense at all. It happens a lot.
Yeah, and I guess as well, like it probably does help as well, as you said, that there's no big ego there, and you're all sort of getting on with it. Helps a lot as well.
Yeah.
What I'm curious to know about as well is, I think sometimes you forget that the show's an espionage show, because I guess like as audiences now, we're probably more used to those sort of more action spy films. So your Jason Bourne films, your Bond films, your Mission Impossibles. There's probably some more that come to mind. That will come to mind later on when I finish recording and have a dream about it. But in this show's case, there is espionage. There's something always afoot, and as audience members, you're not necessarily one step ahead of the character, which I quite like, because you're kind of the like a surrogate to them in terms of like, oh, you're on the journey along with them, and you kind of want to work it out at the same time. And each person's experiences as agents vary, as you see with River, who's very, I want to save the day. And then you've got Jackson Lamb, who's very cynical, but he knows every trick basically like a funnier version of George Smiley. And I guess you need to create that sort of visual language of espionage feel in the show. And we see it in the scene where River's with Spider on the bridge, and we are shown like a very vantage point. The scene cuts to a vantage point shot, which the more I think about it, the more it reminds me of the opening scene in The Conversation.
It's all we talked about. It's all me and Danny Cohen, the DOP, ever talk about is The Conversation. It's just one of our fetishes. I mean, it's a sort of, because it's almost a trope, that sort of long lens thing. But it's a lovely trope, and people understand that as a spy thing. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing. I think you touched upon in the question, maybe not deliberately, but it's actually what you talked about it as a spy thriller. But actually, you then started describing the characters. And of course, that's the joke. The joke is, deep down in its DNA, it's an office comedy. It's an office comedy, but you set everyone through the world of espionage and things like that. And of course, that in a way is what makes it funny, because it's one part The Office and one part Bourne. I mean, a one part James Bond. And I think, to me, that's what sets it apart a bit. And it's not an out and out comedy, but it's got a wry, ironic look at the world. On top of that, it's a sort of social commentary. I mean, I think famously, Mick Herron's first Slough Horses book came out at Brexit, and the whole thing is a sort of office comedy in a sort of dilapidated, rundown, not as good as it should be Britain. So mixing an office comedy with in a way, some of the tropes of espionage with a little bit of social commentary is sort of the world that Slow Horses exists in. There's a lot of spy films and things like that particularly me and Danny, the DOP, have talked about, and a lot of them are our sort of favorite films. So we always have nice opportunities to just shamelessly use things from other films. And in a way, to come back to the first thing we talked about how little television I watch, I still have watched a lot of spy things, and I know, and I certainly, mostly me and Danny just talk about The Conversation. it's one of our touchstones, the zoom lenses.
So I love The Conversation, and I think it's a masterpiece of a film, and just because of the way that it's made, and
But I would sorry to interrupt you. It's also a character piece, and that's what makes it. It's the thing of there's stories, there's plots, but you got to have characters, and actually, in its own way, is a dissection of Gene Hackman's character. And I think as long as it ties back to character, it has some deeper meaning, I think, to me, as a viewer or as a filmmaker. Stories are stories, if you know what I mean, but it's how it affects humans is when it comes alive for me.
Yes, and I think as well, like with Slow Horses, because it has those, I think there's character beats where it is about what we were saying about like having that sort of office comedy mixed to it, but the idea of like why you love these characters and why each person has a unique unique feel about them.
I mean we one of the things that me and Jack Loudon talked about River is River thinks he's James Bond, and he's almost James Bond, but he's not James Bond, and actually he's slightly closer to Larry David from Curb Your Enthusiasm than he is James Bond, because he can't quite help himself by trying to do the James Bond quip. He's got the same problem that Larry has, which is that Larry, oh, look at little Mark, he's got the same problem that Larry has, which is he can't stop himself. So he's got this arrogance and sort of assuredness that is almost James Bond, and he's almost very good at his job. he's just life has been catastrophic for him, but he's really close to being James Bond, but not.
It's also the confidence that he'll go into doing something and then actually it backfires, and it's like, oh,
every time. Every time. It's just I mean, it's but again, I think in a way, he's the character that I would suspect the audience mostly relate to, because Lamb is ultimately unknowable, and Lamb, I don't think anyone watches Lamb, Jackson Lamb, looks at him and thinks, "Oh, that's me." But I think River, we've all done a little bit of River in our life, haven't we? We've all done a little bit of, we thought we could do this, and we thought we'd be better at it than we were. Horribly backfired. Everyone feels a little sorry for us rather than admiring. I don't know. That I can relate to.
I think that's like a daily occurrence in my life.
Yeah, exactly. It's the story of most people's lives, probably. But whereas Jackson Lamb is not that's not the relationship we have with him.
No, I think with him, it's I wish I could sometimes come up with those quips to talk to people, but then also you think about, if I talk to people like that in the daily life, I'd probably have some teeth missing, and potentially complaints from HR and work and other issues as well.
Yes.
But I think as well with like these characters, and when you're fleshing out, I guess when you're going through scripts and seeing how the journey that these characters take, when you're working on the show, what was your favorite character arc to explore and develop for this third series?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a simple answer to it. I don't know. I mean, structurally, River is certainly the central character. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, he's the one that, in a way, you share the experience with. I think so. I think he's always first and foremost in that respect. There's another interesting thing about repeated series, of course, is that most characters begin and end roughly the same place they are, and that's an inbuilt issue with how television works. So a guy like River is the one who's closest to almost escaping who he is, and he never can quite do it. And it moves along, but he's trying to escape. And that's in a way something that I think is most relatable to, and it's the thing that has the beginning, middle, and end of the story, I think. I mean, I sort of very much enjoy, in a way, the joint lead between Jackson Lamb and River Cartwright. That to me, that's a very clever structural thing, because in a way, Jackson is the show, but River's the heart of it. And again, I think that in that respect, the program has its cake and eats it. It has a superhero at the start, at the middle, Jackson Lamb, and a also fallible human next to Jackson Lamb.
Okay. I think there's a solid choice on that one, because I think you're right with the reoccurring television series that how do you continue these people's arcs and also keep it interesting for audience members to really side with them and continue to be on their side. I think with River as well, is as he is the main character, I feel like his character as a whole has gotten better as the series has gone on as well, in terms of just how it's been developed and Jack's performances as well.
Yeah, but I mean, he has more and more backstory, and all these actors get more and more comfortable in their part. I mean, I think that's in a way one of the great advantages of long-running television. A film, they have 90 to 120 minutes to get a whole arc in, and they might come back, but it's mostly they never do. Mostly it's a one-off. So these people, they have a build-up of character, and they have a build-up of confidence in how they do their character, and they can try other things, because it's not just a one-hit wonder, if you know what I mean. It's not just one go at it and then you're done. So I think that's in a way what people always talk about, is what television does that film doesn't do. So I agree with your analysis. Okay. River's also got the advantage of being secretly Scottish, which automatically makes him the lead character, but I'm neutral about that.
Okay. Well, I think you make a fair point there, and I think one other thing is just the way that as well that actors can hide their actual accents, and
Yeah.
that
'Cause
must be a really weird thing to do in terms of
yeah.
changing the way you speak
I mean,
effectively.
there's a funny thing, which is he's Scottish, and the guy playing Duffy is also Scottish. So we had a great scene with River beating Duffy, but Duffy beating River up in a jail cell in the park, and it's two Scottish guys pretending to be English guys getting directed by a Scottish guy. there's some good moments of accent confusion, but these guys are pretty good at it. They're professionals, and actually Chris Riley, who plays Duffy, never comes out of accent. So I only started speaking to him as a Scottish person at the end of the show.
Again, I know that's probably him as an actor as well, but do you think he might play that off as well as like a prank? So like all the time you think that he's English, and then all of a sudden you meet them at the rap party and his voice is completely different.
Well, his voice actually, interesting enough, is a different pitch when he's Scottish. So it is a quite interesting thing to deal with. When I first met him, he accidentally broke into Scottish accent for the first two sentences, and then never did I hear it again until he finished. But yeah, it'd be quite funny. It'd be quite a funny prank if you could be bothered to do it all the way through. Or maybe he just is English. You think he's now pretending to be Scottish? It's possible.
I think there's a funny story about Christian Bale because his American accent was so convincing that when he turned up at the end of filming to the rap party or something else, and then he started talking normally, people were like, "What is wrong with him? That can't be his real voice." And then it turns out that's how he speaks.
They literally didn't know. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Some guys are great at it. It's very.
I've got two final questions.
Okay.
I mean, I've got two questions, sorry.
Yeah. One final one and one just before the final one.
So there's like the finale, and then there's like the post-credits finale.
Okay.
So the first one is one that I sort of want to tail off from what you just answered in terms of when you've got actors coming who are reoccurring characters, but then you mentioned as well about Nina Gold casting in special guests as well, and people coming in just for the series. So in this series we have Sean Donovan, played by Shoppy, whose last name I will not try and pronounce and butcher, and as sort of basically like the new kid at school. How do you go about as a director integrating him into the cast and into the flow and rhythm of the show?
Well, I mean, in rehearsals, we had rehearsals of we don't rehearse all of it, that's for sure. But we rehearsed a couple of key scenes, particularly scenes between him and Standish, played by Saskia Reeves. And so we had me, Will, Saskia, and Charlie, and I've just forgotten her name. Charlie and the girl who plays his sister, whose name I've suddenly forgotten, and I feel terrible about that because she's Elliot, because she's a really terrific actress. We rehearsed a lot of these things. One of the things with Sean Donovan is he has his own program in a way, because we have this very advanced short film we make at the beginning of episode 1. So that was shot early on-ish in the process. So in a way, he had a chance to make his own film anyway. It was like making a very elaborate short film with him and Catherine Waterston. So I think in a way he got very comfortable with the crew and what sort of tone we had and all that sort of thing. So it wasn't terribly difficult. And he's just a very good actor. The most terrifying thing when you direct television is the guests, because you could rehearse them, and you obviously did the auditions and all that. And the first time they open their mouth on a take, the first shot you do with them, I have to say it's always nerve-wracking. Because if they just are not, and the worst of all of the people only in for one day, because it can just be terrible. So it's a nerve-wracking thing, but it's less nerve-wracking when Nina Gold says that guy's really good, because she knows what she's talking about. So and he's an experienced actor. But it was a particularly interesting moment, which was shooting the 10-minute short film in Istanbul with two actors that are not in the rest of the rest of the program. And that was a sort of fun misdirection by the writer. Look, we're going to start the season. Oh, it's a totally different program, before you realize it isn't.
And I can imagine as well, like, it can be nerve-wracking stepping in because it's new people, and as you're saying as well, having those guest stars, like what is it that you might get today, or someone for the day, and thinking, okay, how are we gonna make sure we get we get their scenes, but then also add in their own little flavor as well to the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, of course, on certain shows, I don't really remember it happening on Slow Horses too much, and I've forgotten about it. But if it did happen, you do get actors that come in and are suddenly overwhelmed by the size of certain shows or who they're acting against and things like that. So it can be quite, if I was acting against Gary Oldman and I'd never met him before, I might be terrified, understandably.
Well, I was absolutely terrified when I met him, when we worked in the same building.
Yes. When was that?
So this was 2016. So he must have been doing Darkest Hour.
Yeah.
And we were in this, I don't know if they still use it as a production base, but it's the
old art school.
Old art school in Holborn. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if they still use it. No,
because I think that's being knocked down to build flats or a hotel or
I
something.
think it's being turned into something, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and which is a bit weird because it's like heritage has been completely knocked down. But oh well. And I remember walking past and I saw him, and then for some strange reason, I know this is audio, but I'll show you. I went like this, pointed at him, and then he looked up, and then basically it was like we both were like Wild West drew guns. And then I said, "Oh, you're Gary Oldman," and he said yes. And then and because I was still kind of new to the industry, I basically was like, "Oh, you're a fucking legend." He laughed. He said, "Thank you." And then I ran off because there would be an assistant or somebody there who will be like, "What are you doing?" That was embarrassing. So I was like, I'm going to run off. So by the time I come back, it will not be there. And he wasn't. But
there's somebody I did an interview where somebody asked me what's it like to direct Gary Oldman, and Gary Oldman's very nice to direct. I mean, he's very professional. He likes direction. We talk about it. But I literally, he'd come up and ask you, "What should I do this or that?" And you give him an answer, but internally you're going, "You're Gary Oldman. Why are you asking me?" So, but you actually, it's not. You have to engage and think. But his instincts are incredibly good, and of course, he directed a great film. So it's not. So it's. I'm not sure he's going to learn that much from me. Let's be honest. But he's. I would say surprisingly interactive, as you can work something out with him. But he's a real. I mean, he really knows what he's doing. And then when you go in post and you're watching the rushes, and you see this sort of natural little hesitation he does somewhere, and then you see it does it exactly the same in every take. It's very much worked out, and it's not one of these sort of fly by night operations. The guy's brain is doing it, So I find that very inspiring, slightly terrifying.
I think it's slightly terrifying that he could do the same thing in every take. It's
shocking. It's absolutely shocking what these guys can do because it looks unbelievably natural, as if he hasn't thought about it, and it looks unbelievably natural all 10 takes. So he obviously has done it, and he's just but that's that's when you're actually good at your job.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I've just had one more question. Sorry, I know this. So sorry, this is final B, and I have final C in a second. But final B, I just want to point out because we mentioned Darkest Hour, and there's a bit where Jackson Lamb has that speech, and then he says, "Oh, who was it that said the quote? You can't reason with a tiger when you have a head in its mouth." Was that line improvised, or was that written already in the show?
It was, I would say it was, it's not improvised in the sense that Gary suggested it to the writer. He thought it was funny because, of course, it also had Sam West in it. It was also in Darkest Hour. So it's improvised in the sense that somebody thought it would be a fun thing to do after the script was written. But it's not like the camera was on him and he suddenly came out with it, you know. So it's I don't know whether you class that as improvisation or some sort of contribution. But I mean it's a very good in joke. I mean it's very clever, and it worked extremely well in the end of the, you know, in the place it is. But again, that's the thing of that Will can do, and that you have to be open to, is letting these guys come up with stuff. You know, that's just value added, isn't it? It's just something that just makes it a funnier, clever scene. You know, but it's not just happening there and then.
Yeah, I just wanted to check, because there was something that popped into my head, and I just thought I have to ask this, or I won't. I'll be annoyed. And now to my final question: what was your favorite scene to direct?
In a way, my favorite scene to direct was Freddie Fox abusing River, because it really was like watching like just a great comedy, and everyone was laughing and just having a good time. And I would say it's one of these moments I really came home and I said to my girlfriend about how we just shot like this marvelous thing, and it was just fun. But most scenes in Slow Horses are quite fun to direct, I have to say. And also, but to go back to what I said earlier, it's sort of the show's policy, and it's certainly my policy, that you never shoot something as if it's another scene, you know, like an infill scene. So every scene is fun because you just got to do something with it. And I really believe in that. I really believe when you're making something, you are asking the audience to engage with something, and you've got to give them something that makes it worth engaging with. And I think the first film I ever made worked with the legendary cameraman, a guy called Brian Tofano, who shot, among other things, Trainspotting and Billy Elliot and Quadrophenia. And Brian had this thing where he wouldn't let you just shoot a scene like, what's the easiest way to cover this scene, to make this scene work. He always made it, you had to add at least one element. You had to think of one thing that makes this special or interesting or difficult, or just something you haven't seen before or something. And I know it sounds a bit banal in a way, but it's not. It really is like the audience, don't give them mediocre, give them something that's really enjoyable, you know, or really interesting, or really that they should be watching this, not watching it, if you know what I mean. And I think on Slow Horses, so we just didn't shoot scenes that were, that's just how we're going to do it. Just never did it. And it's a discipline, and it's self-conscious and active. So everything has got something. Everything. You just don't let yourself be in that position of just making average. I mean, I don't know if it always works, but that's the ambition.
I guess as well, like in terms of just like making every scene count, right, as well. Because as an audience members, like I'm sure there's a lot smarter people than me who've done studies to show that people's attention spans aren't great. So you want to make sure what you're making and everything that's being shot is important, and people are engaged and not checking their phone or doing something else whilst they're watching it. You want bums on seats, engaged.
But again, it's in a way, it's something that's so obvious it sounds banal. But it's not a bad thing to not forget. You know what I mean? Just keep it, you know, it is entertainment, and it is occupying somebody's time between their birth and their death that they're not going to get back. so just, you know, and these other channels and there's other things to watch, and there's books to read, and there's things to do. So just don't make the assumption that what you're making is worth making unless you really attack it.
And I think that's a really good way to end the episode.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Saul, for your time. Slow Horses Season 3 streaming now on Apple TV. Go out, watch Saul's work, and everybody else is on the team as well, and enjoy it. Thank you again, Saul.
Lovely to be here.
Take care, and bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.